Hello and welcome to People's Planet podcast. This podcast aims to explore sustainability and make it more accessible. In today's episode, I'm joined by Simon Morris and Marcel with us. Marcel and Simon are co hosts, and today we'll be talking to Marcel. So, Simon, why don't you go ahead?
Thank you, Esmond. Yeah, hello all. Today we've got a very interesting episode. We'll be interviewing Marcel, who is one of the three co-hosts on the People's Planet podcast. The aim and the idea of this podcast really will be to get a deeper understanding about Marcel's sort of past, her history, what she's currently working on, and more importantly, what she enjoys, what she's interested by. So hopefully you'll see a flavour of that in the coming weeks through the interviews that we'll be doing as part of this podcast. Let's pass straight on to Marcel then. Marcel, thank you very much for being here. Um, let's just get
Welcome to the show,
yes,
Marcel.
welcome.
No, thanks guys for inviting me. Hopefully you'll be interested in what I've got to say.
Let's hope so. um, as the title of this podcast suggests, and as we said in the introduction, we're very much interested by sustainability. That's the focus of the podcast. Two aspects of that are people and planet, and the third aspect really is economy or profit. Uh, but before we delve into that, Marcel, from your point of view, could we just get a little bit of a background on yourself, sort of your education moving through sort of professional history? Just give us a sort of gist about where you are at now at the moment with work.
Sure. So up until what did I say, 5 years ago, if you think of a stick of rock and if you were to cut through it and it would say Blackpool, Blackpool or Brighton, Brighton or whatever. If I was a stick of rock, mine would be automotive, automotive, automotive. And the reason I give you that description is because I studied automotive engineering at Loughborough University in
Yeah.
the Department of Transport Technology. And from there, I was hired as a graduate recruit directly by Ford Motor Company
Okay.
based in Dunton in Essex. And the bulk of my career on and off. There has been stints where I wasn't in automotive, but primarily that's where I've spent the bulk of my career, to the extent that in 2003 I actually got to go to Australia as a result of working in the automotive industry. Sadly, there is no automotive industry in Australia anymore, but back then, and as a result, I got to become an Australian citizen. So, choosing the automotive path as a career, certainly my personal experience is that it has served me very well. But like I say, up until 5 years ago, that was it. And then I took a bit of a different path, the sustainability path primarily, um, but with a focus on manufacturing SMEs,
Yeah.
um, because, their role in the supply chain is pretty critical in terms of the overall outcomes of achieving what needs to be done from a sustainability perspective. We all need to be on board. Um, However, when you look at the supply chain, they are somewhat restricted in what they can do because they need to comply with the specifications of the OEMs. Certainly in automotive, again, I've already explained my background. So, unless those OEMs are taking a more sustainable approach to what they are specifying by way of materials and things like that, then, the poor SME is limited on how they can respond.
Yeah. Yeah. So with that sort of massive background coming from an automotive engineering sort of background, where I assume there wasn't too much mention, or it wasn't at the forefront of your mind, sustainability, and now becoming almost into a sustainability professional, how would you define the term sustainability?
Um, I mean, there's obviously those definitions, like you touched on about the three P's, people,
Yeah.
planet, and profit, or environmental, economic, and social. But my personal definition is one of normality, by way of what it takes to be sustainable should be the norm,
Yeah.
as opposed to it being put up as this entity that we are seeking to achieve.
Yeah.
Our everyday behavior should support what is the definition of sustainability by way of, you know, taking actions that aren't going to impact on future generations, um, in a negative way. Let me add that to what I've just said there. Um, so for me, sustainability is about behavior and actions that we take today that are going to ensure the future.
Now that's a really interesting definition. That it's pretty aligned with the sort of UN's definition. If you've come across that, which is I'm going to absolutely butcher it now, but it's to meet the demands for today, for meet the demands of the present, without compromising the ability to meet the demands in the future.
100%, yeah.
And it has to be that sort of fine line of being able to do what we need to do today, but also make sure we can do it in the future. How do you then think your role that you're currently in feeds into that sort of definition of sustainability?
So back in, when was it now? I've got to wind the clock back. 2021, I made a conscious decision to step out of automotive, and for the first time in my career, um, and work in a university. Never done that before. I'd only always been a student. And here I am back in 2021. I joined Warwick University, specifically Warwick Manufacturing Group.
Yeah,
And again, specifically, I joined the SME team, small to medium enterprise team. So I was very fortunate in the role as a technology transfer engineer, um, that I got to work with manufacturing SMEs based in the Midlands, um, again specifically on business transformation. um, and I again fortunately was able to work on a offering that WMG make, which is Enzin net zero initiative, to help SMEs understand what it means and also how they might change their behavior and their processes, um, to become, you know, net zero or move towards net zero.
Thank you, Marcel. That's wonderful. So, um, for you personally, how was this journey, this switch from, well, transformation from, OEMs and automotives to sustainability? And you mentioned WMG Group and, university and working with SMEs specifically. I guess two questions. Their main two questions: how did you find it, and what is your opinion on how people are finding it, specifically SMEs?
Um, Disappointing is a word that comes to mind. Only because, when you're passionate about something, you kind of naturally assume and hope that everybody else is, and that isn't necessarily the case. Um, so you have to adjust your approach so as not to offend people, because they're doing a lot of good stuff, but they potentially could be doing more. So I had to kind of adjust myself in that regard and figure the best way of how to engage with these SMEs to get them on board. So I had to kind of maybe slow myself down in my tracks to kind of understand their pain points, which primarily, especially at the time when I was working in that role, were around the financials. And by definition, SMEs are not very large. Resource wise, they are limited. So, how many people are available to do all these things? And here you are now wanting me to be more sustainable in what I do. I don't even really know what that means for me. So there's a whole bunch of stuff going on, which, sorry, go
Did
ahead.
you had to learn a lot about sustainability yourself before you could kind of preach it,
Not
or talk
necessarily.
to people about? Because to me, for me specifically, it's, as we discussed in previous episode, my kind of domain is very different to was very different to sustainability. So I had to do a lot. So how was that for
Um,
you?
yes and no, because of my auto background and the focus on productivity and lean and weight reduction, there's elements of those practices that lend themselves towards supporting a more sustainable approach, is how I'll describe it. So that's the no part where I didn't really need to learn anything. Where I did need to learn more, and I'm still learning, and I know this is Simon's area, is the whole LCA piece, the life cycle analysis piece, because that isn't anything that I had really
Yeah.
encountered before, you know. So it was a bit of a mixed bag. And you've also kind of, I feel, got to put these
Yeah.
things in some kind of order. I I describe it as crawl, walk, run.
Right.
Starting with LCA might be too um, advanced, for want of a better word, when you can see a whole bunch of wasteful activity going on.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's working out of the various tools that contribute towards sustainability
Yeah.
and where the client
I
is,
think with
which
the
ones to start with.
Yeah, I think with sustainability, to me, it seems like it's more like going from outside to inside. So if you can visually spot the problems, waste, for example, you can see that lots of stuff is going to waste, raw materials. Then yes, LCA, in my opinion, with my limited knowledge and usage, it's more about hot spotting in the first instance. So you find the hot spots across your manufacturing chains and across your processes, and that is a very iterative process. So you do it over and over again. Simon can talk about this all day, I'm
No
sure.
pressure.
Please do correct me, Simon. Please do correct
Nice.
me if I'm wrong. But yeah, that's
Uh,
great. Thank you.
And one other thing I'd like to add is, as much as the three of us, probably lead our conversations with the environmental benefits. Remember, I said I had to adjust maybe my energy, my enthusiasm, and recognize the pain point that the SMEs experience, which is more the economic one,
yeah,
and lead with that. Because again, this is a path not previously traveled. There's uncertainty and doubt. So it's, if you start with that they're going to connect with and be most comfortable with first, and that whole know, like, trust piece. Well, who is
yeah,
Marcel, and what do you mean coming in here telling me my business is
Yeah.
not, I've been in it for 20 years and I've done all right so far. So you have to tread a bit carefully, and it's not the intention to upset anybody,
Yes.
but it's just that whole dynamic of change.
Change is difficult
how
always.
how do you find um the sort of job or the role as the person coming in to try and remove some of those pain points and try and encourage an adoption of sustainability? Is it, as you've mentioned, almost adopting and applying lean manufacturing principles and principles that they may already have in place in another method and from a sort of sustainability point of view? Is it taking those small steps one at a time, as you mentioned, crawl, walk, run? Um, or is it absolutely the sort of the stick running in and saying the world's burning, we have to do something tomorrow or today?
I mean, they say that people are motivated by sense of loss than sense of gain. Um, but equally, you're trying to build a relationship here. And we are limited for time, or I certainly was, because of the model of interaction with the SMEs. So, it was a bit of a softly, and nudging the comfort zone without blowing it up. At some point we do have to get uncomfortable. I've got a term that I use: get comfortable with being uncomfortable, and you'll be fine. Um, but not to the extent where they're
Yeah,
now paralyzed and won't take any action. So you touched on what I'd said about the lean and things like that. That's been around for quite some time. So even though they may not be applying it,
Yes.
they've heard it before. Whereas some other terms associated with sustainability, I talked about net zero. There's also, like circular economy. Um, people say circular what? So again, language I think is very important. We all get it. Um, but we just need to be mindful that some of the language we use isn't the everyday language of the people I'm trying to work with. So, with that in mind, engage with them using language that they understand and feel comfortable with.
That's great, thank you. In terms of the implementation, so how was your experience with LCA? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Mm. Yeah, I think you said a very interesting thing, getting confused because there are many products out there and many calculators, I should say, out there. But um, could you tell us a little bit more about that? Because I think this is very important. I know that some consultancies are primarily using some very sophisticated softwares, some rely on traditional spreadsheet approach, and the data they're collecting it from the databases and the high cost associated with purchasing the softwares or databases, whatnot. So apart from that, the confusion, it's very interesting comment. I think we should
Yeah,
explore
I
it.
think we may be using, is it one click or something? Simon, help me out here if I'm not
I think there is one.
calling it right. Um, but where we tapped into what the KTP can bring
Mhm.
is, there's a particular academic that we're working with at WMG who is, how can I say, specialized, and the devil is in the detail. Is one thing that I will say about the quality of the data set. Um, and he was able to help us get that level of detail. Like my colleague, who's responsible for the LCAs, kind of got stuck, knew what he wanted to achieve, but didn't have the depth of granularity in the data to get the outcome that he was trying to achieve. And we spoke with a colleague at the university who'd clearly got to that point at some time previously and had developed or got access to a particular data set
Mm.
that basically opened up what it was that my colleague was trying to achieve
Mm.
through the LCA that he was trying to produce. So yeah, the detail in the data set is one thing that is very
Yeah.
Yeah.
important. No two LCAs, so to speak, are the same because they depend on the
I
quality of the
think you raise
data
a
set.
really interesting point there, especially for people coming in now. It's about the data that we're able to collect, but you can't be overwhelmed by the data. Even if you're only able to collect 5 or 10% of all the impact that's happening, at least you're taking a step there and you're starting to, without
Hmm.
quantifying the impact, we'll never be able to fully address it. Um, I think we'll move away a little bit from that and sort of now think about next steps. Marcel, you're as you said, 2021 was when you started thinking about sustainability. You've got a long career sorry to remind you, got a long career ahead still, before retirement and a yacht and whatever else we dream of. So, how do you envision your role as a sustainability professional and everyone else, sort of in this field of work and broader? How do you think that's going to change over the next 5-10 years?
That's a good question, and I'll pay you later. Thank you for asking that. Um, my aspiration is to become a professor of practice because, as I've already said, I'm an engineer. Maybe what I've not said is I'm a chartered engineer. Um, so, for those that don't understand or haven't heard that term before, that means you're recognised by your peers um, that beyond the initial degree, the work that you have done and continued education is in support of spreading the engineering message and attaining the quality of the engineering that you undertake. So I'm a chartered engineer with the IET, and um, in a moment of madness 5 years ago, I decided to undertake a doctorate, but not a PhD, um, a DBA, so a Doctor of Business Administration. And the reason I did that as opposed to a PhD is because of the practical um, side of
Yeah,
life that I lean towards. Hence why becoming an engineer, hence why, being part of this podcast, because there's a bunch of podcasts out there, talking sustainability, but, we are focusing on the practical side, what it actually means. And I think that's important because, you can theorize all you like, but at some point to bring about the difference, you've actually got to implement. You've got to do stuff. So with the DBA, it's about bringing new knowledge, and here we all are, KTP associates, bringing new knowledge. And once I've got my doctorate, I can say the aspiration is to become a professor of practice and undertake a number of executive education type um, positions with multiple universities, not just one. Again, it's about spreading the message, whilst also hopefully, you know, being a bit of a go-to person on the part of my favourite SMEs, as businesses. They're my favourite. I mean, I don't mind the larger companies, don't get me wrong. But it's accessing the decision makers, and I think the opportunity to access the decision makers is easier.
Mhm,
It's not easy, but maybe easier
mhm.
when
yeah.
the business
How
is smaller.
how do you see the sort of adoption of sustainability then? Do you think that it will become even more prevalent? It'll be the first word mentioned in a boardroom rather than way down on the agenda, or is it just going to be a slow burning issue?
I'd like to see it um, pick up pace. And one of the ways that I communicate the role of sustainability in the business, I compare it to quality, right? Now, we've got quality management standards and all the rest of it, and we've got health and safety standards. And, without health and safety and without quality, you're not in business,
Yeah,
Mhm,
right? Don't even bother opening the front door. No one's going to want to do business with you. And I explain that the same is the case with what it takes to be more sustainable
mhm,
in how you do business. Um, I'd say we're not there yet, as in it doesn't need to be part of the conversation. It absolutely does, but it will hopefully become on a par with quality.
right. Yeah.
It's expected.
Mhm,
So when businesses are tendering for projects and winning customers, um, there will be questions associated with sustainability that you need to be able to not just answer, but show evidence that that's how you operate.
mhm. Yeah, that's right. Uh, Fantastic. Well, good luck with the DBA. As someone who has been through the process, I would imagine it's similar. Uh, how are you considering sustainability as an element in your DBA?
So the DBA is 3 papers.
Right.
I'm tapping into the whole knowledge transfer between academia and industry,
Hmm.
as a mechanism by which companies can move forward on their sustainability journey,
Hmm.
depending on what it is that they want to achieve.
Hmm.
So it is embedded in that regard. I'm also doing a case study um, on the company that I'm working with, who did the KTP for a reason,
Right.
to become more circular
Mm.
in how they operate. And then the third paper is an industry wide paper from a lighting industry perspective as a whole.
Mm.
What are they doing as an industry,
Mm.
um, by way of becoming more circular, not only in the products,
Yeah.
but also in the services,
Yeah.
or maybe bringing services
Mm.
more than just products
Mm.
that are actually going to enable sustainability in the building sector.
How do you manage DBA and your full-time work? It's a challenge.
It is a challenge, and well, the original DBA was around manufacturing SMEs,
Right.
which my DBA supervisor was like, Marcel, you need to come in,
Mm.
as they say,
Mm.
narrow and deep as opposed to so broad. So when I got the KTP role, actually, it helped me to crystalline my thinking
Right.
more around the focus of the DBA. So now it is industry specific and a company case example of somebody who's actually decided to undertake seriously what it means to become more circular. So the two are now interwoven. Rather than having a day job and an evening job, they're kind of intertwined. So I'm very fortunate in that regard.
Nice. Very nice. Well, good luck with that. It's yeah, doing great.
Yeah, good luck, Marcel. It must be a big undertaking. Um, I'd like to get a final thought on you before we close. Really, I think you've mentioned there right at the end that education and knowledge transfer as a mechanism for adopting change. Have you got any sort of closing remarks around the power of education and knowledge transfer to make this change that's required?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about innovation, you know, um, and knowledge, and where do you get that knowledge from to become more innovative? We've got these entities, universities, of people who undertake research, and you've got business out there doing the do, contributing towards the economy of the country. Um, I think there does need to be some more joined up thinking on how the two work together, especially in terms of, you know, anything where it's unknown, not been done before. I keep hearing, just tell us what you want and we'll do it.
Mm.
But I've not heard of anybody, and I'm calling the government to task here, without getting too political,
Mm.
around, saying to businesses, yeah, you've set this net zero target, but they've not
Yeah.
told anybody how to get there. So tapping into research, which is one of the main functions. I know they educate people, universities, but they're also, a source of research. So collaborations where industry taps into that knowledge, that the universities have, and equally, um, universities get to see the outcome of that research by way of the practical impact. Like I said, I'm doing a DBA for a reason,
Hmm.
because of that impact side, as opposed to just coming up with some hypothesis.
Hmm.
So, yeah, my closing word is one of greater collaboration, I think, between academia and industry is the way forward.
I, I think that's a brilliant closing remark there, Marcel, and it sums up really what you've talked about from the start of going that it's got to be the little steps, not overwhelming, and avoiding confusion, collecting data, and then spreading the message. All of that would be made a lot easier with collaboration, with academic bodies, and sharing what we know. Um, Thank you very, very much, Marcel. I hope that's given everybody a little bit of a background on who you are, what you're interested in, what your aims are, and and sort of a spice for what to expect coming forward through the People's Planet podcast. So I'll say goodbye and thank you very much. Usman will say goodbye and he'll remind everyone how to get in contact because I can't remember the email address, and then we'll close it there.
Yeah, Marcel, thank you very much. It's great to have you. And
Thanks, guys.
for all the listeners, if you'd like to get in touch or get involved with the podcast, please do reach us out on social media. And our email address is peoplesplanetpodcast@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you, and your feedback is very important for us to drive this forward and bring out the best content we can. Thank you very much. Thank you, Marcel and Simon. We'll meet together next time in the next episode. Until then, have a good one.